The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell in silver curtains against the windows of the emergency clinic on Maple Street, a relentless percussion that seemed to speak of endings rather than beginnings. Inside, beneath the sterile fluorescence that hummed like a dying prayer, Elena Vasquez wiped down the examination table for the fourth time that hour, though no patient had used it since midnight. She was 34 years old, and she had learned that loneliness could be measured in the hours between one heartbeat and the next. The night shift suited her. It always had, even before David's death, before the funeral that smelled of lilies and broken promises, before the mortgage payments began arriving like clockwork reminders of everything she had lost. Now, 3 years later, she welcomed the quiet of these hours, the space between 2 and 5 in the morning when the world seemed to hold its breath and even the most desperate souls found somewhere else to be. Her daughter, Lucia, would be asleep now in the small apartment above her grandmother's garage, dreaming whatever dreams 7-year-olds dream when their fathers exist only in photographs and bedtime stories. Elena worked these hours so that she could be there when Lucia woke, could make her breakfast, could walk her to school with their hands intertwined like two survivors clinging to the same piece of wreckage. This was the architecture of her existence. Clinical shifts and school runs, grocery lists and insurance forms, the endless negotiations between what was needed and what could be afforded. She had built this life from the ruins of another, and if it was not beautiful, it was at least standing. The clinic occupied the ground floor of what had once been a Victorian boarding house, its bones old and tired beneath the renovations. Elena had always felt a kinship with the building, the way it had been repurposed, reimagined, made useful again, despite the weight of all its years. The waiting room held 6 plastic chairs, a coffee machine that dispensed something approximating coffee, and a television that played muted news on an endless loop. It was here, in this temple of small mercies and minor wounds, that he appeared. She did not hear the door open. One moment, the waiting room was empty, holding only the ghosts of the day's patients and the phantom echo of the rain. And the next moment, he was there, a figure in a dark coat, standing with an unnatural stillness that made her think, absurdly, of statues in old churches. He was tall, with the kind of face that might have been carved rather than born, all sharp angles and shadows that the fluorescent light seemed unable to fully illuminate. His hair was black, longer than fashion dictated, pushed back from a forehead that bore no visible wound, though his coat was dark with something that gleamed wetly in the artificial light. Elena's training took over before her fear could establish dominion. She moved around the reception counter, her sneakers squeaking softly on the linoleum, her hands already reaching for the intake clipboard that procedure demanded. "Sir, are you injured?" He turned his head toward her with a slowness that seemed deliberate, theatrical even, as if he were unused to responding to such ordinary questions. His eyes, when they met hers, were the color of old amber, brown shot through with gold, holding a depth that made her think of wells and caverns and all the dark places where light went to die. "I require—" He paused, and something shifted in his expression, a flicker of confusion that seemed incongruous with the carved certainty of his features. "I require sanctuary." His voice was like the lowest notes of an organ, resonant and ancient, carrying an accent she could not place. Not Spanish, not Italian, not anything she could name from the maps she had memorized as a child, dreaming of journeys she would never take. "This is a clinic," she said. "If you need emergency services, no." The word came sharp and swift, cutting through her protocol like a blade through silk. He took a step forward, and she saw him wince, a small contraction of pain that contradicted the predatory grace of his movements. "No hospitals, no records, please." It was the please that undid her. In 3 years of night shifts, she had seen many things. She had stitched closed the wounds of men who would not explain how they had acquired them. She had tended women with bruises shaped like hands, believing the lies they told about stairs and doors. She had learned that the night brought its own species of desperation, and that compassion sometimes required blindness. But she had never seen anyone who looked quite like this, who stood quite like this, who said please as if the word were a foreign language he was only now learning to speak. "Come with me," she said. She led him to the examination room, noting how he moved, fluid and silent despite his obvious pain, his eyes cataloging every corner and shadow as if mapping escape routes or identifying threats. When she gestured to the examination table, he regarded it with an expression that might have been aristocratic disdain or a simple unfamiliarity. "I do not lie down," he said. "Then sit." She was surprised by her own firmness. "And take off the coat." For a moment she thought he would refuse. His eyes met hers with an intensity that should have been frightening, and perhaps was. But Elena had lived through things that had taught her the difference between dangerous and desperate. This man was both, but the desperation outweighed the danger. She was almost certain. He removed the coat. Beneath it, his shirt was white, or had been, before the wound had painted it in shades of rust and crimson. The blood had soaked through the fabric from his left side, spreading like a dark flower blooming beneath his ribs. "My God," Elena breathed. "You need a hospital. You need surgery. This is nothing," he said, and, though his voice remained steady, she could see the slight tremor in his hands, the pallor beneath his skin that spoke of significant blood loss. "I have survived worse. I simply need—" Again, that pause, that searching for words that seemed to evade him. "Time. I need time to heal. That wound needs stitches at minimum. Antibiotics. Probably a transfusion. No transfusions." Something flickered in his amber eyes, something that looked almost like dark amusement. "Trust me when I say that would complicate matters significantly." Elena studied him. In the better light of the examination room, she could see details that the waiting room had obscured. The unusual pallor of his skin, the faint tracery of veins visible at his temples, the way his canine teeth seemed slightly more pronounced than normal when he spoke. She had spent her career learning to read the body's language, and his was speaking a dialect she did not recognize. "What happened to you?" she asked. "I was betrayed." The word carried centuries of weight. "There are those who believe I have lived long enough. They may be correct, but I find I am not ready to concede the point." "Someone stabbed you?" "With a blade designed specifically for the task, one of very few weapons that could." He looked down at the wound, his expression clinical, detached, as if assessing damage to property rather than person. "They were not skilled enough to find the heart, though they came closer than I should have permitted." Elena moved to the supply cabinet, pulling out gauze, antiseptic, suture materials. Her hands knew this work, could perform it, while her mind raced through possibilities and impossibilities, calculating the distance between what she was seeing and what could be reasonably explained. "Take off your shirt," she said. "I'm going to clean the wound and see what we're dealing with." He complied with a grace that suggested he was accustomed to being undressed by others, though probably not in clinical settings. His torso was lean and pale, mapped with scars that no modern surgery could have produced, long, clean lines that spoke of blades, circular marks that might have been made by arrows or bolts, a puckered starburst near his shoulder that looked like nothing so much as an entry wound from a musket ball. Elena had studied enough history to recognize weapon marks from across the ages. She was looking at a body that had been wounded by implements no one had used in centuries. The fresh wound was deep but clean, a diagonal slash that had parted the flesh but seemed to have missed the major organs. As she cleaned away the blood, she noted something else that defied explanation. The edges of the wound were already closing, the tissue knitting itself together with a speed that should have been impossible. "What are you?" The question escaped before she could stop it. He was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes fixed on some point beyond the walls, beyond the rain, beyond the small circle of light in which they both existed. "I am old," he said finally. "Older than this city, older than this country, older than the language we are speaking. I am the last of a dying line, a king without a kingdom, a monster who has spent centuries trying to remember what it meant to be a man." He turned his gaze to her, and she saw in it a weariness that seemed to have no bottom. "In your stories, they call us vampires." Elena's hands did not stop their work. She continued cleaning, continued applying antiseptic, continued the mechanical motions of care, while her mind processed information that should have shattered her understanding of the world. "Vampires," she repeated. "I do not expect you to believe me. I do not require belief. I require only what I asked for, sanctuary until the wound has healed enough for me to move safely. And the people who did this to you, they will be looking. They have been looking for a very long time, but they will not expect me to seek shelter here, in this—" He gestured at the examination room, the fluorescent lights, the medical equipment that hummed and blinked. "In this temple of human frailty. They think I view such places with contempt. Do you?" He considered the question with an intensity that suggested it had never occurred to him before. "No," he said at last. "I view them with envy. You die, but you also heal. You break, but you rebuild. I have watched your kind for centuries, watched you fall and rise and fall again, and I have never understood how you bear it. The brevity of your existence, the certain knowledge of your own ending. We don't have a choice," Elena said. "You survive what you have to survive. You do what you have to do." "Yes." His voice was soft now, contemplative. I am beginning to understand that. She finished cleaning the wound and reached for the suture materials, then paused. The flesh had already closed significantly, the angry red edges now pink and calm, healing at a rate that rendered stitches unnecessary. How long until you're healed? She asked. A day, perhaps 2. He pulled his ruined shirt back on, wincing slightly at the movement. I will leave before dawn. You will not see me again. It's 4 in the morning now. Dawn is in 2 hours. Something shifted in his expression, a calculation, a reassessment. Then I must ask more of you than I intended. Is there somewhere I could remain until nightfall? A storage room? A basement? Any space that can be made dark? Elena thought of the basement, the one they used for old files and equipment that no one had bothered to throw away. It was cramped and dusty, but it was dark, and it had a door that locked from the inside. Why nightfall? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The sun is problematic, another gift of my condition. That dark amusement flickered in his eyes again. The stories are not entirely wrong, though they exaggerate considerably. I will not burst into flames, but I will be weakened, and I cannot afford weakness while they hunt me. Who are they? The ones hunting you? Others of my kind. We are few, and we are not unified in our philosophies. There are those who believe that our time has passed, that we should fade into extinction rather than adapt to this world that has grown beyond us. And there are those who believe that I, specifically, should have died centuries ago, before I could do the damage I have done. What damage? He was quiet for so long that she thought he would not answer. I was not always as you see me now, he said finally. There was a time when I ruled through fear, when I fed without conscience, when I viewed humanity as cattle rather than kin. I have spent the last 300 years trying to atone for the first 500, and there are those who believe atonement is a luxury I have not earned. Elena looked at him, this ancient creature in her examination room, this self-confessed monster who had asked for sanctuary in a voice that held the ghost of something that might have been humility. The basement is through there, she said, pointing to a door in the far corner. There's a cot in the back, left over from when Dr. Harris used to sleep here during flu season. I'll bring you blankets and some water. You would do this, knowing what I am? I'm a nurse. I help people who need help. Whatever else you might be, right now you're wounded and you're being hunted, and that's enough for me to go on. He stared at her for a long moment, his amber eyes unreadable. You are not afraid, he observed. I've been afraid, Elena said. I've been afraid of losing my home, afraid of not being able to feed my daughter, afraid of everything falling apart around me. Whatever you are, you're asking for help, not threatening me. That makes you less scary than the mortgage company. His lips twitched, not quite a smile, but the suggestion of one, as if the expression were something he was trying to remember how to make. What is your name? He asked. Elena Vasquez. Elena. He pronounced it carefully, as if tasting each syllable. I am called many things. Most of them are not pleasant. But once, before the darkness, I was called Alexander. You may use that name, if you wish. Alexander, she repeated. Get some rest. I'll wake you at sunset. She led him to the basement, showed him the cot, the light switch, the lock on the door. He moved through the dusty space like a shadow given form, his wounds already forgotten, his attention fixed on the configuration of exits and entrances. Thank you, he said, and again the words seemed to cost him something. Elena closed the door behind her and returned to the examination room, her hands trembling now that she was alone. She looked at the blood on the floor, the ruined coat still draped over the chair, the evidence of impossibility that she would have to clean before the day shift arrived. A vampire king if she had understood him correctly. Hiding in her clinic's basement while ancient enemies hunted him through the night. She should have called the police. She should have called someone, anyone who could explain or contain or deal with what she had just encountered. But instead, she found herself thinking of his eyes, of the weariness in them, of the way he had said please, as if it were a word he had not spoken in centuries. She had survived enough to recognize survival in others. She cleaned the examination room, disposed of the coat in the biohazard bin, and settled in to wait for dawn. The day passed in a blur of ordinary emergencies, sprained ankles and allergic reactions, an elderly man with chest pains who needed transport to the hospital, a child with a fever that turned out to be nothing serious. Elena moved through her shift like a ghost, performing the rituals of care, while her mind circled endlessly around the locked basement door. She thought about telling someone. She thought about what she would say, how she would explain. She thought about the look in Alexander's eyes when he spoke of betrayal, of atonement, of centuries of existence measured in bloodshed and remorse. At 3 in the afternoon, she drove to her mother's house to pick up Lucia. Her daughter ran to meet her, all 7 years of boundless energy and questions that never ended, and Elena held her close, breathing in the scent of childhood, apple juice and finger paint, and the particular sweetness of innocence. "Mama, are you okay?" Lucia asked, pulling back to study her face with an intensity that sometimes frightened Elena with its perceptiveness. "You look tired." "I am tired, Mia. Long night." "Did you help lots of people?" "I helped some." Elena smoothed her daughter's dark hair, so like David's had been. "I always try to help." She took Lucia for ice cream, sat with her in the park, pushed her on the swings while the afternoon light turned golden and began its slow decline toward evening. All the while, she thought about the creature in her basement, about the wound that had healed itself, about the hunters who might even now be closing in. At 6 o'clock, she dropped Lucia back at her mother's house with excuses about an extra shift, about bills that needed paying, about all the small lies that lubricated the machinery of daily life. "You work too hard," her mother said, watching her with worried eyes. "You're going to burn out." "I know what I'm doing, Mama." "You always think you do." Elena drove back to the clinic as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and amber. The building was dark when she arrived, the day shift long gone, the night shift not yet begun. She had 30 minutes before anyone else would arrive, 30 minutes to descend into the basement and face whatever waited there. She found him awake, sitting on the edge of the cot with his hands folded in his lap like a penitent awaiting judgment. In the dim light that filtered through the basement's small, high windows, his wounds had fully healed, the skin beneath his torn shirt smooth and pale, unmarked by any evidence of the violence he had suffered. "You came back?" he said. There was something in his voice that might have been surprise. "I said I would." "Many have said such things to me. Few have meant them." Elena pulled up an old folding chair and sat facing him, close enough to see the subtle shifts in his expression, the flicker of emotions that crossed features more accustomed to stillness than feeling. "Tell me about them," she said, "the ones who are hunting you." He was quiet for a moment, gathering thoughts that probably stretched across centuries. "We were a council once," he began. 7 of us, the oldest and most powerful of our kind, governing what remained of our people through the ages. We had rules, how to feed without killing, how to move through your world without drawing attention, how to survive in a time when humanity's knowledge and weapons grew ever more sophisticated. What happened? I grew tired of feeding. His voice was flat, matter of fact, describing atrocity as if it were weather. Not the physical need, that never ends, but the moral weight of it. Every life I took, even with restraint, was a world extinguished. A mother, a father, a child who would never grow old. I began to question whether our survival was worth the cost. And the others disagreed? 3 of them, Victor, Maria, Constantine. They believe that we are predators, that humanity exists to sustain us, that guilt is a weakness that will lead to our extinction. His lips twisted in something that might have been a smile. They are not entirely wrong. The guilt has certainly led to my near extinction, several times now. But you're still here. I am stubborn. It is perhaps my only virtue. He rose from the cot and moved to the small window, looking out at the last light of day fading from the sky. They have been trying to kill me for 200 years. This is the closest they have come. They had help. A human hunter, one of the few who know of our existence and seek to end it. He provided the blade, they provided the ambush. I escaped only because one of them, Maria, hesitated at the crucial moment. Why would she hesitate? Because we were lovers once, centuries ago, before our philosophies diverged. Even the cruelest among us sometimes remember what it was to love. He turned back to face her. She will not hesitate again. They will come for me, Elena Vasquez, and if they find me here, they will kill you too for offering me shelter. Then you should go. I should. He took a step toward her, then stopped as if restrained by some invisible force. But I find that I do not want to. I find that I want to understand why you helped me, why you looked at what I am without fear, why you treat me as if I were worthy of compassion when I know myself to be unworthy of anything. Everyone deserves compassion. Do they? I have lived long enough to see the worst of what both our kinds are capable of. I have been the worst in my time, and yet you sit there with your healing hands and your gentle voice, and you speak of universal deserving as if it were simple truth. I didn't say everyone earns it, Elena said. I said everyone deserves it. There's a difference. He stared at her with those ancient amber eyes, and she saw something shift in their depths, A thawing, perhaps, of ice that had accumulated over centuries. "Who are you?" he asked, and the question carried a weight that transcended its simplicity. "I'm a nurse. I'm a mother. I'm a widow who works too hard and sleeps too little and has forgotten what it feels like to be anything other than tired." She met his gaze without flinching. "I'm nobody special. I'm just someone who was here when you needed help." "No," he said softly. "You are much more than that." The sound reached them both at the same moment, footsteps above, too many of them, moving with a predatory purpose that spoke of hunting rather than healing. Alexander's entire bearing transformed. The weariness evaporated, replaced by a coiled readiness that made Elena suddenly, viscerally aware of what he had told her, that he was a predator, that he had ruled through fear, that he had done terrible things in the long darkness of his existence. "They have found me," he said. "You must leave, now. Use the back entrance, go to your daughter, and do not look back." "There are 3 of them," Elena said, her voice steady despite the fear that clawed at her chest. "You're still weak. They'll kill you." "Perhaps. It has been a long time coming." He moved toward the basement stairs with a grace that seemed impossible, silent and swift and deadly. "Go, Elena. Thank you for the sanctuary. It was more than I deserved." She should have listened. She should have run, should have fled to her daughter, should have let the ancient monsters destroy each other in the ruins of her workplace. That would have been the sensible choice, the survival choice, the choice that any reasonable person would make. Instead, she followed him up the stairs. The clinic's waiting room had become a battlefield. 3 figures stood among the overturned chairs and shattered coffee machine, their forms as pale and perfect as Alexander's, their eyes holding the same unnatural gleam. 2 men and a woman, dressed in dark clothing that seemed to absorb the light, carrying blades that glinted with something other than simple steel. "Alexander!" The woman spoke his name like a curse. She was beautiful in the way that marble is beautiful, cold and hard and eternal. "You could have made this easy. You could have accepted your end with dignity." "Maria." Alexander's voice was calm, conversational, as if they were meeting for dinner rather than death. "I was hoping it would be you who came. I wanted to see your face when you failed." "There will be no failure. Tonight." One of the men stepped forward, tall and cruel, with eyes the color of winter ice. "You are weakened, old friend. We can smell the blood you lost. This ends here." "Then let it end." Alexander moved, and Elena had never seen anything move that fast. A blur of shadow and violence that met the 2 male vampires in a clash of blades and fury. The sound was terrible, metal against metal, supernatural bodies colliding with enough force to crack the walls. Maria did not join the fight. She stood apart, watching with calculating eyes, her blade held loosely at her side. Elena understood suddenly that she was waiting for Alexander to be overwhelmed, waiting for the moment when her hesitation would no longer matter. Elena looked around the ruined waiting room, her nurse's mind cataloging resources, possibilities, weapons. The fire extinguisher mounted by the door, the cleaning chemicals in the supply closet, the UV lamp they used for sterilization. The UV lamp. She ran. The supply closet was 10 steps away, an eternity in a room full of monsters. She heard Alexander cry out in pain, heard the triumphant snarl of his attackers, heard Maria's cold laughter as the tide of battle turned. But she did not stop, did not look back, did not let herself think about what she was doing. The UV lamp was industrial grade, designed to sterilize equipment between patients. Elena grabbed it, yanked its cord from the wall, and spun back toward the chaos of the waiting room. The 2 male vampires had Alexander pinned against the wall, their blades pressed to his throat and heart. Maria was approaching slowly, savoring her victory, her own blade raised for the killing blow. Elena did not know if UV light would affect vampires the way the stories suggested. She did not know if this was brave or foolish, or simply the desperate act of a woman who had forgotten how to walk away from people who needed help. She turned on the lamp and aimed it at Maria's face. The scream that tore from the ancient vampire's throat was not human. It was the sound of agony crystallized, of centuries of darkness suddenly confronted with blazing light. Maria staggered back, her hands flying to her face, her blade clattering to the floor. In that moment of distraction, Alexander moved. He drove his elbow into the face of the vampire holding his throat, twisted free of the other's grasp, and caught Maria's fallen blade in one fluid motion. What followed was too fast for Elena's eyes to track. A dance of death performed at impossible speed, blades flashing, bodies colliding, ancient grudges finally settling their accounts. When it was over, 2 of the vampires lay still on the clinic floor, their bodies already beginning to crumble into something that looked like dust and ash. The third, Maria, knelt at Alexander's feet, his blade pressed to her throat. "Finish it," she said, and there was no fear in her voice, only exhaustion. "You know you should. You know I will not stop." Alexander stood over her for a long moment, his amber eyes unreadable. Then, slowly, he lowered the blade. "Go," he said. "Tell the others what happened here. Tell them that Alexander Volkov has found something worth protecting, and that any who come for him will find a welcome they do not expect." Maria stared at him, confusion warring with hatred in her ancient eyes. Then her gaze shifted to Elena, still standing with the UV lamp clutched in her trembling hands, and understanding dawned. "A human," she whispered. "You would risk everything for a human? I would risk everything for someone who offered me compassion when I had done nothing to earn it. I would burn what remains of my existence to protect someone who looked at what I am and chose to help anyway." He stepped back, giving Maria room to rise. "Go, and do not return." Maria rose slowly, her movements uncertain, her perfect face still marked by the burns the UV light had caused. She looked at Alexander with something that might have been grief, might have been regret, might have been the ghost of whatever love had once existed between them. "You are a fool," she said. "I have always been a fool," Alexander replied. "It is only now that I am learning to be a fool for the right reasons." Maria walked to the door, paused with her hand on the frame, and spoke without turning. "They will send others. This is not over." "It is never over," Alexander said. "But I am tired of running. I have found a place to stand." Maria disappeared into the night, and the clinic fell silent. Elena set down the UV lamp with hands that shook so badly she nearly dropped it. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind a trembling awareness of what she had just done, what she had just witnessed, how close she had come to dying. Alexander crossed the ruined waiting room in 3 steps and caught her as her knees buckled. "You could have run," he said, his voice rough with something she did not recognize. "I told you to run. You needed help. You could have died. You should have died. No human should have been able to—" He stopped, his arms tightening around her, as if he were afraid she might dissolve. "Why? Why would you risk everything for a monster you met only hours ago?" Elena looked up at his ancient face, saw the bewilderment there, the desperate need to understand something that did not fit into his centuries of accumulated cynicism. "Because you asked for help," she said simply. "Because you said, please." Something broke in his expression then, something old and hard and carefully maintained, crumbling like the bodies of his enemies had crumbled, leaving behind only ash and whatever grew in its absence. "Elena," he said, and her name in his voice sounded like a prayer, like an invocation, like the first word spoken after a very long silence. "Elena, I do not know how to be what you seem to think I could be. I have been a monster for so long that I have forgotten the shape of anything else." "Then, learn," she said. "You have time, don't you? All the time in the world. Time means nothing without purpose. I thought I understood that once, centuries ago, but I lost the thread of it somewhere along the way." He released her slowly, reluctantly, and stepped back to look at her with eyes that held a new kind of light. Not the cold gleam of predation, but something warmer, something almost human. "Would you teach me? Would you let me stay? Let me learn? Let me remember what it means to protect rather than destroy?" Elena thought of her daughter, of her mortgage, of the ordinary struggles that had defined her life for so long. She thought of the vampire king standing before her, asking for help with an expression that suggested he had never asked for anything in his existence. "I have a daughter," she said. "She's 7. Her father died 3 years ago, and I've been raising her alone. If you're going to be part of our lives, she has to come first. Always. I understand. I'm serious. I don't care how old you are or how powerful you used to be. She is my priority. If that's ever a problem, it will not be." His voice was firm, certain, holding a conviction that surprised her with its intensity. "I have spent centuries taking from the world. Let me learn what it means to give. Let me protect something small and precious and infinitely valuable. Let me remember why the light is worth seeking, even for one who has lived so long in darkness." Elena looked at him, this ancient creature who had killed and conquered and despaired across the ages, now standing in the ruins of her workplace, asking for a chance to be something better than what he had been. "Okay," she said. The dawn came slowly, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold beyond the clinic's broken windows. Alexander watched it from the shadows, his face turned toward the light as if seeing it for the first time. "I should go," he said. "Find somewhere safe for the daylight hours. The basement is still there. Elena began the long work of cleaning up the waiting room, gathering shattered glass and overturned furniture, as if this were simply another mess to be managed. "You can stay as long as you need. And tomorrow night?" She paused in her work, considering the question and everything it implied. "Tomorrow night, you can meet my daughter. We'll have dinner like normal people. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Alexander moved to help her, his ancient hands gentle as they gathered the debris of the battle he had fought and nearly lost. They worked in silence, two unlikely allies cleaning up the evidence of impossibility, preparing to face whatever came next. When the day shift arrived, they found a clinic that looked almost normal, a little messier than usual, perhaps, with a broken coffee machine and some chairs that needed replacing, but nothing that suggested the night's violence. Elena blamed it on vandals, filed a police report, and answered questions with the calm efficiency of someone who had learned to lie for survival. That evening, she introduced her daughter to a family friend named Alexander, a quiet man with unusual eyes who listened to Lucia's endless questions with a patience that seemed almost supernatural. They ate dinner together, spaghetti that Elena made from her mother's recipe, and afterward, Lucia showed him her collection of drawings, explaining each one with the passionate seriousness of childhood. Alexander held each drawing as if it were a sacred manuscript, studying the crayon renderings of houses and flowers and family portraits with the attention he might once have given to treaties and battle plans. "This one," Lucia said, pointing to a figure in one of her drawings. "That's my daddy. He's in heaven now, but Mama says he still watches over us." Elena watched Alexander's face, saw the flicker of something old and painful in his eyes, and then the softening that followed. "He must have been a very good father," Alexander said, "to be remembered with such love." "He was." Lucia nodded solemnly. "Are you going to be Mama's friend now? If she will allow it?" "Good." Lucia gathered her drawings and looked at him with an appraising expression that was startlingly adult. "Mama needs more friends. She works too hard and she's always tired." "I have noticed that as well." "Then you should help her. That's what friends do." Alexander looked at Elena, and in his ancient eyes, she saw something she had not expected. Hope, fragile and new, like the first green shoots pushing through snow. "Yes," he said, "that is what friends do." The months that followed were an education in improbability. Alexander learned to navigate the modern world with Elena as his guide, the technology that baffled him, the social customs that had changed beyond recognition, the thousand small kindnesses that humans offered each other without expecting anything in return. He learned to be gentle, to be patient, to be present in a way that his centuries of solitary existence had never required. And Elena learned that immortality was not power, but burden, that the weight of endless years could crush even the strongest soul, and that sometimes the bravest thing a monster could do was ask for help, becoming something better. The hunters did not return, not yet, but both of them knew that they would. Maria had survived, and Maria had always been the most patient of their enemies, willing to wait decades for the perfect moment to strike. But for now, there was peace. There was Lucia's laughter as Alexander taught her to play chess with pieces that had belonged to kings now centuries dead. There was Elena's hand in his as they walked through the quiet streets at night, two damaged souls learning to heal together. There was the slow, steady work of building a life that neither of them had expected to find. One night, months after that first desperate encounter, Alexander found Elena on the clinic's roof, watching the city. Lights shimmer like earthbound stars. She had just finished a difficult shift, had lost a patient she had fought to save, and the grief sat heavy on her shoulders. He sat beside her without speaking, offering only his presence, the cold comfort of someone who understood loss in ways no mortal could. 300 years ago, he said finally, I watched a city burn. I had ordered that burning, had believed it necessary, had told myself that the deaths meant nothing in the scale of ages. Now I look at these lights and I see all the lives they represent, the loves and losses, the small moments of joy and sorrow, the infinite complexity of existence compressed into each illuminated window. And I wonder how I could ever have thought any of it was meaningless. Elena leaned against his shoulder, drawing warmth from a body that had none to give. How do you bear it? She asked. The memories? All those centuries of remembering? I am learning, he said, that memory is not the enemy. The enemy is forgetting why we carry on. You have reminded me of that, Elena. You and your daughter, your small, fierce family that refuses to surrender to grief. You have taught me that survival is not enough, that we must find reasons to live, even when living seems impossible. She turned to look at him, her dark eyes reflecting the city's glow. I didn't save you that night, she said. You know that, right? You saved yourself. I just held the lamp. You held the lamp. His voice was soft, reverent. You held the lamp when you could have run. You chose to fight for a monster you had no reason to trust. That is not nothing, Elena. That is everything. He took her hand, his cold fingers intertwining with her warm ones, two impossible creatures finding their way towards something that looked like hope. I cannot promise you safety, he said. I cannot promise that my past will not find us, that the enemies I have made will not eventually come for their vengeance. But I can promise that I will stand beside you for as long as you will have me, that I will protect your daughter as if she were my own blood, that I will spend whatever centuries remain to me trying to be worthy of the compassion you showed me. Elena smiled, the first real smile she had managed since losing her patient earlier that night. That's a pretty good start, she said. I am working on it. I have had many centuries to learn how to be terrible. I suspect learning how to be good will take at least as long. We have time? Yes. He looked out at the city, at the lights, at the endless testament to human resilience and hope. We have time. In the clinic basement, where an ancient vampire had once hidden from his enemies, there was now a small shrine of sorts, Lucia's drawings on the walls, Elena's spare medical supplies on the shelves, a cot where Alexander rested during the days that were still dangerous to him. It was not a kingdom, not a throne room, not anything like the grand halls he had, known in his first centuries of existence, but it was home. And for a creature who had wandered homeless through the ages, who had known only power and isolation and the bitter taste of endless survival, home was a kind of miracle he had never expected to find. The night was deep now, the city quieting toward its brief hours of rest. And somewhere in the darkness, Elena knew, their enemies were plotting and planning and waiting for their moment. But here, on this rooftop, with her hand in Alexander's and the stars wheeling overhead like ancient witnesses, she felt something she had not felt since David's death, since the grief and the fear and the endless struggle had become the totality of her existence. She felt hope. Not the bright, naive hope of youth, but something stronger, something forged in darkness and loss and the improbable kindness of a vampire king who had learned to say please. Come on, she said, rising and pulling him to his feet. Lucia will be wanting her bedtime story. She's decided you're better at the scary voices than I am. Alexander smiled, a full smile this time, transforming his carved features into something almost human. I have had considerable practice with scary voices, he admitted. I know, but now you're using them for good. They descended from the roof together, the vampire king and the single mother, walking toward the small apartment where a 7-year-old girl waited with a book and a demand for stories. Outside, the night held its breath, full of dangers and possibilities, full of ancient enemies and uncertain futures. But in this moment, walking through the darkness with someone who had chosen to stand beside her, Elena felt that the future, whatever it held, was something she could face. After all, she had survived worse. They both had. And now they would survive together. The story was far from over. The hunters would come, the past would demand its due, and the complications of loving a creature born of darkness would multiply in ways neither of them could predict. But for now, there was a child waiting for a bedtime story, a cup of tea growing cold on the kitchen counter, and the simple, profound miracle of two broken souls finding their way back to something like wholeness. Outside the window, the moon rose over the city, silver and eternal, bearing witness as it had borne witness to countless stories before this one. It would continue to rise long after Elena's mortal span had ended, would watch over whatever strange future unfolded for this unlikely family, forged in violence and compassion. But that was a story for another night. For now, there was only this: a door opening to warmth and light, a child's voice raised in greeting, and a vampire king setting aside centuries of sorrow to sit beside a little girl's bed and tell her stories of castles and courage and the transformative power of kindness. It was not an ending. It was the beginning of something ancient and new, something that would echo through the ages like a whisper in the dark. And perhaps, in the end, that was all any of them could ask for. Not happiness, not safety, not the impossible promise of forever. Just another chance to choose love over fear, hope over despair, tomorrow over the weight of all the yesterdays. Just another night and someone to share it with. Just this. Just enough.